The most notorious 22 long rifle ammo. What we have today is our CCI Stingers. And you can also get them in a box called the CCI Stingers. Same ammunition, it just has 22 Plankster on the box. So this has been out for a long time. CCI Stinger came out in about 1975. And what they did was they made the case a little bit longer than a typical 22 long rifle case to add more powder. And then they used a 32 grain hollow point and made the overall length the same as a 22 long rifle, even though the case is a little bit longer than typical. And being a heeled bullet, you know, they were able to pull that off and still have it chamber in semi-automatic firearms. So, you know, this stuff has been notorious because it is very powerful. A lot of people have been using it for self-defense for the past 50 years. And it's also notorious because it's been used in a lot of notable crimes. You know, I do watch a lot of the shows that deal with forensics and stuff like that, because it kind of goes hand in hand with what I do with ballistic testing, when you can kind of see, you know, some of the results that happen in crimes with stuff like this. And it's just been a very notorious round for a long time. And really what I wanted to do was see what it would do out of my snub nose revolver, my new Ruger LCR and 22 long rifle. You know, I've tested it out of this other gun here. This is my Notorious TX22 with a 4.1 inch barrel. And what I normally get with that is pretty much over expansion, and it doesn't penetrate enough. What I'm hoping to see with the round through my little snub nose revolver is maybe it won't expand and penetrate a little bit more adequately. And because it's only a 32 grain bullet, if it does start to tumble, it shouldn't limit its penetration that much, because the height of that bullet tumbling, you know, it would still allow it to penetrate deep. So I've been really curious of what it would do out of a snub nose revolver. So we're going to test that most notorious 22 round out of the snub nose revolver. We'll test it out of the semi-auto pistol too, to see how it compares. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics on our first shot to see the best potential we get with that. You know, we have the best potential for expansion and penetration and all of that. Then I'm going to move on to doing more of a real world simulation, where I'm going to have 4 layers of t-shirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics on another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. That'll give us more of our real world, you know, it would show what it would do in an actual living target. And this is about a half representation of the density of flesh in that format. So if we got like 16 inches in here with our rib simulation, it's really like 8 inches in a real living target. So we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot, then our real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up, we'll test this round from our 4.1 inch barrel Notorious TX22. It's rated at 1640 feet per second from a rifle. So let's see what we get out of this 4.1 inch semi-auto pistol. .1201. Malfunction on the first shot. I have kind of a stovepipe-like jam here. I'll keep going. .1227. 1227. 1191. 1227. So that's some pretty good velocity for 22 long rifle. So we're not going to get quite that much velocity here out of our little revolver. I mean, I'd be surprised if we did. But little snub nose revolver. Let's see what we get out of this. .1102. 1103. 1117. 1154. 1108. So I'm honestly surprised. I was expecting like 950 or something like that. And you know, most ammo shoots to the left out of this revolver. This one is not. It is shooting a little bit low, but that's impressive velocity out of a little snub like this, and like no recoil. Another thing is, with the revolver, we're not going to have that stovepipe jam I had with the semi-auto. And if we had a fail to fire, I could just pull the trigger again if I was in a self-defense situation. So it feels pretty good out of this. Let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how this round does out of the 2 different barrel lengths. All right, first up, we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot, our best potential shot. It gives us our best potential to get expansion because there's no fabric in the way that can clog these hollow points. And it gives us our best potential to get good penetration because there's no rib simulation to slow these bullets down. So let's see how it does through our 4.1 inch pistol here. All right. Now let's hit it going through our snub nose revolver. Let's go take a look. All right, let me hit it again with our pistol. Something seems a little off with that, and see if I can get the same results. And another stovepipe malfunction. Let's go take a look. All right, so I took another shot with the semi-auto because that first shot went a lot deeper than I've ever seen this particular round go through this particular pistol, and that would suggest maybe it didn't expand. I can't tell because I can't see the bullet because there's a little bit of bubbling around that bullet, so I have no idea if it expanded, but my guess would be if it did, probably not very well because it went a lot deeper than typical, as where that second shot went about as far as typical. In this first 3-inch piece here, we actually do see striation cutting with every one of these shots, which would indicate maybe it is expanding right away. And you know, it's pretty typical when we don't have fabric to slow down the expansion that we're going to see stuff like this. But what we got going on here with our first shot with the semi-auto pistols, we got about 13.25 inches of penetration. That second shot with the semi-auto, we got about 9.75 inches of penetration. And the one from our snub nose revolver, we got about 8.75 inches. So that is some subpar penetration. But like I said, I think part of that could be over expansion because there's no fabric in the way. So if we put on our fabric and we lower that expansion threshold, that might perform a little bit better. So let's do our real world simulation shot with our fabric and our rib simulation and see how these do that way. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of t-shirt material followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. And again, this is about a half representation of the density of flesh. So 3-inch pectoral is more like 1.5 inches in real life, and half is dense in the rest of that gel as well. So let's see what we get with our real world simulation with our semi-auto pistol. All right, now let's hit that from our snub nose revolver. Let's go take a look. And just to be sure, let me do one more with our snub. Let's go take a look. Alright, so I wanted to do one more with that snub because that first shot severely underpenetrated. I wanted to see if we got a little bit more with the next shot. Now, the one from our semi-auto, that looks about right. That's typically what we see with that Stinger from the semi-auto. So, you know, it performed, I guess, a little bit better from the semi-auto, but worse from the revolver. So yeah, here's our impacts. That is kind of weird right there with the semi-auto, like it is kind of keyholing through and tumbling through. With our snub nose though, they're impacting perfectly straight. So I think, you know, based on that, I'm guessing that the snub is actually impacting this gel straighter, which is causing a huge amount of expansion. and it's consistent. So that's interesting. So a good amount of striation cutting in this first 3 inches, which is, you know, very typical with a good law enforcement round and all that, where we see cutting and all of that. That looks really good. Now through our semi-auto pistol, we got about, we're just shy of 11 inches, or right at 11 inches. Now from our snub, our first shot, we're only at about 6 1/4 inches. Parallax will throw it off from this angle and make it seem like it's a lot deeper, but yeah, 6 1/4. And about 7 1/2 inches with our second shot from our snub. So looking at this overall, it definitely performed a little bit better overall from the semi-auto pistol at that about 1200 feet per second. Dropping down to 1100, you know, it might not just be the velocity. It might, like I'm saying, I think it is partly, I think they're impacting straighter with that snub. So it's just causing it to hit perfectly straight and overexpand. So a little bit shallow in penetration, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad round for self-defense, because they're going to cause a lot of pain going on. And from a perfectly front-on shot, some of these penetration numbers will work. Like I've mentioned before, the 12-inch minimum that you hear, that came from the FBI shootout in 1986, and they simulated you need that much going through a side shot through an arm. But when we're talking about front-on shots, you know, would 7 1/2 inches be enough? Well, that'd be like 3 3/4 inches straight on from a perfectly front-on shot. Would that be enough to hit something vital? Absolutely would be, but you'd have to be very careful with your shot placement, as where through the semi-auto, there's a little bit more room there, wiggle room, where, you know, from an angle, it probably still would penetrate adequately. So it's just something to be aware of. So very interesting. Let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at these bullets. Then I'll show our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at the bullets going through plain gel. The first shot here with our semi-auto pistol, and then we made a second shot here through the snub nose revolver, and then the third shot here was taking another shot through the semi-auto pistol, because this one kind of penetrated kind of deep, and we can kind of see, you know, why it penetrated deeper than typical, because it's not really expanding out consistently. It's kind of bending to the side a little bit, like I was thinking. As where the one through our snub nose revolver, I don't see any evidence of that. It just hit flat and straight and expanded bigger, so that limited its penetration. And we look at the next shot through our semi-auto, which penetrated a little bit less, and that's because it expanded just a little bit more. So pretty consistent that it does expand every time. It just seems like that expansion through the snub there, you know, it's more hitting more straight on. And that's another thing people always ask, why do you shoot so close to the gel? And they're asking that because they actually believe that if I backed up to like maybe 6 or 8 or 9, 10 feet more, I'm going to have significantly more velocity. And that's simply not the case. You might get 4 or 5 feet per second more, but the problem with backing up really far is now I'm not going to be super accurate in placing these shots when I'm putting multiple bullets in a gel block, and I'll end up hitting existing channels and hitting the bullets and all of that just so I can gain 4 or 5 feet per second. And to me, it's not worth it, so I just stand closer. So I just thought I'd make a mention of that. People ask it all the time. Now going through our real world simulation, things changed up. You know, this time I took 2 shots with the snub nose, and we can kind of see the same thing where through the semi-auto here, you know, you get that football shaped thing going on, like it's not impacting very straight. So you're not getting that flat faced expansion, and it'll penetrate better, but it's not expanding very well. As where the first shot with our snub here, through the real world simulation, we can see that it's impacting straight. Straight enough anyway. And the same thing for our last shot, where I took another shot. We're getting that flat face entry, which is causing it to expand out. So, you know, we look at this here with the expansion from our snub, with all these shots right here, versus the ones through the semi-auto over here. Yeah, we can see that the snub causes just a more consistent expansion, but that does limit its penetration a little bit. So interesting. That's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, my practical shootability distance. So I just want to see how these shoot you know, if I just get a nice front sight picture and pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target accurately, how will these do? So from our semi-auto pistol, let's see how this does. Yeah, and those things just, they want to shoot quick and they want to hit your target. That does pretty well. Luckily they didn't malfunction that time. So, Revolver, let's see how this does. That stuff shoots pretty well. Case ejection's fine with that. So overall, I'm liking how this is shooting. So let me back it up more and shoot from really far out just to kind of see how this stuff shoots, just for fun. All right, 75 yards from the target just for fun. A lot of people get mad about this. They're like, you could never use that at that distance for self-defense. Well, I never said it was for self-defense at this distance. I'm just plinking for fun. And guess what? I'm using it from the Stingers box, 22 Plinksters Stingers box. So you can't accuse me of, you know, using defensive ammo for just plinking for fun, because they're the Stingers. So let's see what we get here. 75 yards from our Notorious TX22. Oh, another stovepipe jam. Pretty common with this box here. Keep going. Yeah, I can't tell if I'm hitting or missing, but I think they are shooting just a little bit low from my point of aim with those. Now I know that these were shooting kind of low for the point of aim, so I may have to aim high, but let's just see how these things shoot. I'll aim center mass and see where I think they're going. Can't tell. Let me aim a little high. Actually hit right where I aimed, so let me aim center mass now. Yeah, here's the problem. I don't think I'm hitting, and I can't tell if I'm hitting. I just don't hear anything, so I'm probably missing. I think I hit once maybe. So I'm not really sure where they're going. I haven't got a speed loader yet, as you can see. I dropped one of them. I'll dust off that. So let me just try to shoot a little slower. I think it's just me jerking these shots. I think they are hitting point of aim. So let me keep going here, but slower. It started to do pretty well, and then having a little bit of trouble after a while. And these cases are starting to stick a little bit. I'm pushing pretty hard, it's not coming out. And I've actually gotten a lot of flack for people saying, why don't I just do this all the time when I would slap it? This is the reason why I use that slap technique, is sometimes this type of thing happens where they're not coming out. I'm pushing pretty hard and nothing's happening. So my typical technique is to always go like this and flip it and hit it. And even then it didn't. Even then it didn't. So yeah, that's stuck in there pretty well. So at this point I'm gonna have to tap it probably. Use the bottom of this mag so I don't hurt my hand. And come out like that. So yeah, after a while those things start to get kind of sticky. And that's just because they are pretty hot rounds. So looking at this overall, I think it's not a bad choice. Now, I've definitely seen better performance with the punch. The punch seems to do the same thing every time out of all the handguns I've tested out of. It just penetrates well and does well. But there's something to be said about the Stinger, as where it does tear through pretty well. You get a lot of the striation cutting and a lot of the shallow damage you don't see with the punch. So that expansion actually is pretty effective. So to be perfectly honest here, looking at this, out of the semi-auto, it is questionable. And that is a good cause for a revolver. A revolver like that, how many times did I press the trigger and nothing happened? Like, none. And only when I got done with shooting, let's say, 16, I don't know, something like 30, 40 rounds, then it's getting sticky on the reloads. But if you had this clean and you carry it for self-defense, it would work perfectly fine. So I'm going to say it's pretty good overall. I think the punch is a little better. One thing you probably could do would be to alternate like the punch and the Stinger in a revolver. I think that would be a pretty good setup for self-defense, to be honest. But as it stands with just the Stinger by itself, it's still pretty good. It just kind of underpenetrates. So interesting test. That's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like. Thanks for watching.